This is SLAYsmr, an ASMR channel where every week I talk about a different horror movie that I love. And today, in case you couldn't tell from this guy behind me, we are going to be covering 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I first saw this movie, it was one of those sleepover horror movies, you know. I had heard a lot about it all through middle school and elementary school and how disturbing it was. And this was pre-YouTube. The internet was around, but it wasn't what it is today. You couldn't just find everything about a movie by going online. So I remember looking up some stills from it. And I remember the shot where Leatherface was pulling the girl back into the house on the porch and being really, really disturbed by that because, once again, I'm all about that daylight horror. Those really scary scenes that take place in broad daylight, which to me is much scarier than the night because daylight implies that there are other people around. That whoever this killer is, that they have no caution or shame about what they're doing. That just makes it all the more freaky to me. You don't expect those kinds of things to happen in daylight, but they do. So I remember seeing that shot. I think it's a fairly iconic shot from the movie. And it's funny when it's different today because I feel like before a movie comes out, you see a trailer and you'll probably see a leaked scene or two, or maybe if it gets shown at a comic convention beforehand, you might even see a whole bootleg leaked onto the internet beforehand. But back then, I feel like more often than not, I would just see one still image from a movie, and that was enough to pique my interest and make me want to seek it out. Such was the case with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've loved the movie for a really long time. I loved it as soon as I saw it, and I've kept revisiting it as I've gotten older. I live in Atlanta, Georgia now, but before that I was in grad school getting my MFA in playwriting at the University of Texas at Austin. And I feel like the movie is revered everywhere in scary movie circles, but especially in Austin, Texas. And there are a few reasons for that. For those of you who have been there, you might know that the city is really heavy on genre films. There's a huge horror movie scene there, sci-fi, all that good stuff. A lot that has to do with the Alamo Drafthouse and Fantastic Fest, and there's just a big support for that kind of movie there. So that's one part of it. The other part is obviously the movie takes place in Texas, and it was filmed in Texas. It was filmed in and around Austin. So that automatically is just going to feed into the lore of the movie. And several UT Austin students were involved with the film at the time. Some of the actors actually came from the Department of Theater and Dance where I went to school. And it's funny, you meet enough film people around Austin of a certain age, and I feel like you'll always meet someone who knew the director Tobe and the co-screenwriter Kim Henkel / producer. You talk to any Austin old-timer, or you talk to enough Austin old-timers, and you'll stumble across someone who knew them. When I first got to Austin, Tobe actually died not too long after that. I don't remember the exact date of his death, but I moved to Austin in August of 2017. It was not long after that he passed away, unfortunately. And as a tribute, I remember the Draft House showed like some really pristine print of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so I got to see it in the theater not long after I moved there, which was pretty cool. At UT Austin, there's a place called the Harry Ransom Center, which is kind of, I guess, the archives of the school. It has collections of tons of iconic artists, everyone from Tennessee Williams to David Foster Wallace. I mean, you name it, they probably have something there. I actually got to thumb through a copy of Carrie, Stephen King's Carrie, that David Foster Wallace taught his undergraduate literature class, which was pretty cool. It didn't have anything especially insightful in it. It was really just notes in the margins about the types of slang Stephen King uses and what kind of archetypes he's playing with. Anyway, they have a Tobe Hooper collection, naturally, because, you know, Tobe Hooper made movies in Texas. And not supposedly, definitely, they have the original Leatherface mask that you can apparently get permission to look at. I don't think they let you handle it or anything like they do with some of the books, just because it's old and probably falling apart. But you can go to the Ransom Center if you sign up for an account and talk to them, and if you can show that you're working on some kind of horror movie or some kind of project that might have to do with that, and you need it for research purposes, they'll pull it out for you and you can see it. And I meant to do that before we left Austin, but of course COVID happened and they shut down everything at the school back in March, so never got around to it. I actually remember one of the last things I did on campus was go to the Harry Ransom Center on like a tour and talk to one of the archivists there, and I talked to them about possibly seeing the mask one day. Not one day, but like in a few days. But then right after that, COVID got really bad, so it was not meant to be. But who knows? Maybe I'll get back and do it there. It's a goal in my life at some point. Anyway, we'll talk about some of the filming locations as we kind of go through the movie. Something I really love about this horror movie, or any horror movie, is when you establish from the get-go that it is indeed a horror movie. Now, there's two schools of thought, right? On the one hand, you could argue, okay, we're going to establish that everything is normal and fine and not hint at anything scary that's going to happen, so when the scary thing does happen, it's all the more shocking. I'm trying to think of a movie that does that, maybe. I just saw that horror movie, The Rental, which, I mean, it's got kind of an ominous vibe from the beginning, but you don't really see any sign of the killer until really far into it. You don't see any actual murders happen until really far into it. To me, it felt kind of like a mumblecore romantic drama that suddenly becomes a horror movie, rather than a film that is utilizing both genres equally as it goes along. And I liked it. I'm not saying it was a bad movie by any means, but I think I did find myself, and it's just a personal taste preference, I found myself wanting it to go maybe, 60% romantic drama, 40% horror, rather than 70-30, which is what I felt it was. I felt it was like 70%, romantic, and by romantic, I don't mean that the movie felt sentimental and happy. It doesn't. It's kind of a bummer from the get-go. I mean more that the conflict is steeped in romantic troubles in the beginning, rather than, being stalked by a killer. So that's one way, right? Or you could go the Halloween approach, which Halloween, you could argue, is establishing normalcy only for Michael Myers to upend it, but that's actually not true, because the very opening of that movie is 6-year-old Michael Myers killing his sister. So although we go a long stretch without seeing anything super dangerous, the movie kicks us off with something very dangerous. So it's like it's planting its foot in the ground and saying, this is a scary movie. Yes, other things might happen, but know that this shadow of dread hangs over those events, and eventually it's going to come to seed, and as Dr. Loomis says, death is going to come to your little town, right? And Halloween makes no bones about that from the get-go. Even something like Creature from the Black Lagoon, yeah, I mean, we don't really see the creature for a little bit, but we see a claw come out of the water in pretty much the opening scene. So yeah, I guess maybe I'm talking about foreshadowing. Not all horror movies use foreshadowing, and then a lot of them do, and I do think I prefer it. I'm not saying you have to come out with your scariest moment or best kill or whatever else right out of the barn, but I usually like to see some kind of hint that the filmmakers know what genre they're playing with, right? And I think the Texas Chainsaw Massacre does that beautifully. Now, we don't see anything especially grueling in those first, 5 or 10 minutes. We hear reports that someone has been desecrating graves and digging picking up body parts and arranging them into kind of perverse monuments. So we see a really slow zoom out of one of these kind of gross, bizarre creations, which we'll find out the source of that later on. And then we cut right to the credits, and it's great. I don't even know what exactly is going on in the credits. It almost looks like infrared footage of the sun. To me, it looks like it's the sun boiling. You ever see those really close-up pictures of the sun, and you can see I don't know, I guess the sunspots or the gas or whatever it is kind of swirling around it. It almost looks like lava or something surrounding the sun. The opening credits are over. They are superimposed over footage that to me looks like that, but it's like dark red. And I'm sure they've confirmed somewhere what the actual image is. That's what I've always thought. And later on in the movie, they actually go into a little bit of astrology. When they pick up the hitchhiker, who you find out is the person who's been digging up the bodies. In the back of the van, these kids, they're reading like or one of them, Bam, is talking about astrology and what I don't know much about astrology, but what age or whatever we're in. Like, people always say age of Aquarius or the Scorpio season, and whatever thing it is, and how I don't know how much it corresponds to actual astrology. It's essentially laying out an omen that they're about to go into bad times. So I don't, if the opening credit footage is the sun, I don't know if it's supposed to tie to that or not, but in my head I make that connection, and it gives the movie this kind of mythic scope, even though it's actually a pretty small scale horror movie. It's about, a group of teenagers who stumble upon the home of a cannibalistic family. It's pretty simple, and it's pretty small cast. The scope is small. It's not like Godzilla where it involves the end of the world or something. But the astrology talk, coupled with possibly the sun credits, whatever you want to call them, it kind of zooms out and implies that all is not right with the world. I don't know if I'm reading too far into that. I did just get out of grad school, so I could very well be reading too far into that, but the more times I've watched it, the more I've thought about these bigger kind of global implications about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre solely from an image standpoint. I'm not saying the movie is necessarily commenting on anything socio-political from that time period, but I do think these credits and the astrology talk just gives the movie a bigger sense of something bad is going to happen, and maybe some of the characters are aware of that, they're just not vocalizing it. And then on the flip side of this cerebral kind of cosmic overinterpretation that I might be doing, the antagonists are so memorable. The first one we meet is the hitchhiker, who they pick up while they're on their way to, they've just gone to a cemetery to make sure their grandfather's grave hasn't been desecrated. And by they I mean Sally Hardesty, who's kind of the main character, and her brother who's in a wheelchair, Franklin, and then they have a few friends who are along with them too. Kirk, Pam, and Jerry, I believe. And not far into the movie, they pick up a hitchhiker, which you should never do. But it was, some people still do it, and I feel like it was pretty popular in the 70s, especially among youth culture and counterculture. So they pick up the hitchhiker, who, we of course find out later is the one who's been desecrating these graves. He freaks them out. He talks about a slaughterhouse nearby, and he ends up cutting Franklin's hand, and they kick him out of the van finally. Oh, and when they kick him out, he leaves this weird symbol. The blood on his hand, he smears this kind of symbol on the side of the van, and that to me seems to be tied to the doom-laden astrology stuff too, but I'm not sure. I've never read anything from the filmmakers confirming that. It could just be them. I mean, I feel like this is often the case, right? We try and tie all this logic and greater theme to it, when if you ask the filmmaker, they might just be like, oh, I don't know, I thought it was freaky, whatever, and that's totally cool. That's part of what I love about horror movies, that we always want to make these bigger connections and interpretations, and sometimes it was just the thing that worked, or it was a happy accident, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, he smears this symbol on the side of the van, and I've always thought that had some kind of darker implication. Shortly afterwards, they stop at a gas station where we meet the cook, who we eventually find out is also part of this kind of cannibalistic clan, and they get some barbecue from the station. Now, what's really cool is that they filmed this. The gas station was in Bastrop, Texas, which is like one town over from Austin, and it's still there. And not only is it still there, they've kind of restored it so it really does look like it does in the movie. Not the inside so much, but the outside, as you know, the old antiquated Coca-Cola machine and a truck that is parked there in the movie. And then you go inside and it is an actual barbecue stand. It's pretty good too. And they have a ton of horror memorabilia, so like Leatherface mask, Michael Myers masks, Pinhead, Chucky, whatever. I mean, it's actually a pretty good, pretty big horror souvenir shop. And then my wife and I went. We didn't do this when we went, but you can stay there. They have like lodging in the back. Bastrop, as far as I know, is a safe enough town. It's not quite as much of a city as Austin. It's a little bit more rural, but it's a perfectly pleasant town. So I'm not scared by Bastrop as a community. But if I stayed in that lodging, I think just looking out my window and seeing the gas station and seeing all this imagery from the film would really freak me out. I don't know if I would do well there, but it was pretty cool to see nonetheless. I mean, it was like a half-hour drive from where we lived in Austin, so it was definitely a cool thing to go see. I don't know what the pandemic situation is right now, or if that place is open, but if whenever it's safe to go, or whenever you feel safe to go, go check it out. I think it's literally just called the gas station. If you just look up Texas Chainsaw Massacre gas station, you'll find it. So they go there. They get directions to this house. They're trying to find their old family home and a swimming hole near it. And the cook kind of directs them toward the house, which of course is occupied by himself and the hitchhiker is related to him, and the most iconic person from the movie we're about to meet, Leatherface, who they never go really into his backstory, at least not in this movie, but Gunnar Hansen, the actor who portrayed him, rest in peace. I think he always looked at it like Leatherface was developmentally disabled, and as a result, maybe wasn't totally aware of everything he was doing and was picked on by his family. So anyway, they kind of one by one, the kids all get picked off by Leatherface. Something too I want to be careful on in this podcast is not I know the whole gimmick is, oh, I'm talking about horror movies, but hopefully in a relaxing way. I'm gonna be careful not to go too much into how people get dispatched in the movie. I don't want to describe overly violent things to any of you, because I think that might take away from some of the relaxation. So if you're like, oh, why didn't you talk about this part, or oh, this part's so iconic, why didn't you go into more detail about what happened, it's just because I don't want to be describing violence, if that makes sense, even though I like movies with a lot of violence in them. I don't just like a movie because it's violent, but obviously these are horror movies. A lot of the stuff I'm talking about is violent. I just want to be sensitive to the fact, like, I'm not going to describe a torture scene on this channel, if that makes sense. Anyway, so we meet Leatherface, and Leatherface's whole thing is that he makes these masks out of skin. And once again, I think the movie is really smart for not going too much into the origin of him or how he started doing that or whatever. All we really know is that he's in this family. He works at a slaughterhouse. The way he dispatches people is kind of connected to that. It's almost like he's a butcher. And yeah, and we see him kind of take out these teenagers one by one until it's just Sally and her brother left. Franklin event isn't around for too long, and I want to take a moment really quick to talk about the character Franklin, who once again is in a wheelchair, and is so annoying. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it more in, I really respect that the movie chooses to depict a differently abled character and allows them to be complicated and not perfect and have flaws. I think sometimes when movies do that, especially horror movies, they almost make those characters like not real people. They make them so wholesome and that they're just there to lift up the characters who are not differently abled. And once again, I don't know how much of that was intentional on the filmmaker's part, but I just have always loved how, even though this guy's in a wheelchair, they allow him to have a lot of different levels. He can be funny, he can be really annoying, he can be petty. You can see that his sister has a really hard time with caring for him. In my experience with people with different abilities, including folks in my family, I often feel like movies do them a disservice by not portraying them as flawed human beings. And I think the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, despite being called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and in many ways being kind of like an exploitative film, I think it actually treats its high school characters with realism and gives them things we don't like about them. It gives them flaws, it gives them actual personalities. So yeah, I just wanted to take a moment to praise it for that and point that out. So anyway, Franklin isn't around too long, and Sally becomes kind of the final girl, and she gets chased by Leatherface, and she makes her way back to the gas station, to the cook who she doesn't know is a villain yet, and he acts like he's gonna take care of her, and of course he just captures her and brings her back to the house, and she goes through this torturous dinner scene with the Sawyer family, which also includes Grandpa, who is this really old patriarch of the family, who they just cake in like the most wrinkliest latexy makeup. But I think the guy who played him was in his 20s or something. He's like younger than I am, which cracks me up. Something I never quite understood about this movie, and I still don't know if I do, is that it's and once again, I know I'm going into gross stuff, so I'm going to try and talk about it as vaguely or maybe big picture as possible. The movie is known for being about cannibals, right? This family is a family of cannibals. They make barbecue at this gas station, and they talk about working in a slaughterhouse, and the dinner scene, I guess maybe hints at that a little bit too, but I don't know. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is that the movie's actually not very graphic or bloody. It's disturbing, but it's not bloody. And when Sally goes to the gas station, she looks at the meat that's being cooked on the spit, and she kind of freaks out. And I guess the implication is supposed to be that she is realizing that it's humans that they're cooking, but to me it doesn't look like it. It just looks like regular barbecue to me. So I've always wondered that about the movie when I watch it. I'm like, is that what's going on there? Is she looking at the barbecue and realizing it's not barbecue, and that's what's freaking her out? I have no idea. Or is it just the thing where, with all the talk of slaughterhouses and head cheese and all this other stuff, people just kind of connected the dots that they were cannibals? I don't know. If I didn't know that they were flat out cannibals, I don't know if I would get that completely from watching the movie. I would think it's maybe kind of implied. The problem is the sequels and some of the remakes that happen later on lean really hard into the cannibalism angle, so it's kind of impossible to go back and watch that first movie without any kind of context. You know what I mean? By the time I watched, most of the sequels were out, so it was already loaded. I already went into it knowing this cannibalism thing, so yeah, it's just something I wonder about. I wonder how much intent there was behind that from Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel going into it. What do you think? I don't know. If you want to talk about cannibalism in the comments, please do. Are we the only ASMR channel to talk about cannibalism? Probably. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I might be sinking the channel right now. I have no clue. this horrific dinner scene, and Sally manages to escape something very bad happening to her. Leatherface, of course, goes after her with the chainsaw, and it's great because it's the movie starts off during the day. It's like midday Texas, blazing heat coming off of the pavement. You can just feel how hot it is in this movie. As their friends start to disappear, they're kind of stuck on this property that takes us into night, and by the time Sally escapes, the sun is coming up again, so we get this really nice afternoon to night to dawn progression. And once again, the final scene is in broad daylight, which is really freaky to me. So Sally's running away, and Leatherface and the Hitchhiker are coming after her, and she ends up getting saved by this trucker who like throws a wrench at Leatherface and then kind of just runs away, and then this other trucker picks her up. Anyway, so the very end of the movie, it's Sally kind of running away, just screaming her and laughing her head off because she's escaped, and Leatherface is in the middle of the road swinging his chainsaw around almost like an airplane. It's funny when I watch it, I really almost picture a little kid playing airplane, like, you know, putting out their arms as wings and making airplane noises. That's what the final shot of Leatherface waving around his chainsaw reminds me of. Once again, don't know if that's what the intent was for Gunnar Hansen, but that's what it reminds me of. Just talking aesthetically about the movie real quick. I mentioned the heat. Apparently, they just filmed this, I mean, when it was really hot in Austin, which is a lot of the time. In the end, the hitchhiker gets run over by a truck, and there's this shot of him kind of dead on the ground. And Edwin Neal, I think was the actor's name who played him. He talks about how they were filming this scene, and you know, he had his kind of cheeks just stuck against the pavement while they were setting up or getting the shot, and he said it was so hot his skin was like beginning to cook, which I don't know if that's one of those exaggerated actor stories or if that's really the case, but you can definitely feel the heat in this movie. Just the opening shot is of this dead armadillo, and you can see the heat and waves coming off of the gravel. And for anyone who lives in Texas, or lives in Austin specifically, or has lived in Austin, you know what I'm talking about. There's always that. I talked to some grad school friends today who are still in Austin, and they said I think they're in the middle of that right now. It was like 107 or something awful like that, and it's not like the entire summer is unbearable, but there's always like a 2 to 4 week period where it's just awful, and you can really see that in the movie. And then there's the big house that the Sawyers live in. It's just strewn with animal bones and feathers and all this kind of nasty stuff, and it's one of those things where you just watch it and you feel like you need a shower afterwards. It's just dusty and grimy, and the art direction is pretty fantastic. Oh, so that house, you can actually see that house too. So that the Sawyer house was actually in Round Rock when they filmed the movie, which is another town right next to Austin. It's kind of, if you go north on 35, you hit Round Rock, and Round Rock is really nice now and has a bunch of stores and whatever. It's like a pretty standard, just nice place to live. But back in the day, I think it used to be a lot more rural and sparsely populated, so it looked a lot more backwoodsy. And the original house was in Round Rock. It's weird. It's kind of this really stately house, but it looks very desolate at the same time. Like, it looks like it's in need of a paint job, and obviously the interior is decorated really horribly because of what the Sawyer clan has used. And in the movie, there's not much around it. There's a lot of wide open space, which is not really the case in Round Rock today. I mean, there's some stretches where there's a lot more space, but it looks like a mid-size suburb kind of thing now. Anyway, I don't know who exactly did this, but they transported the house out of Round Rock a few hours away, and they reconstructed it, and you can go see it. And like the gas station, it's a restaurant now. It's kind of like a fancy. The food itself isn't fancy, just the estate is fancy. It looks fancy. It's a breakfast place, so we drove to that. It's a little bit further away from Austin than the gas station is. Yeah, we had some good pancakes. It was awesome. But it's funny when you go to it, because it literally, I mean, it is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house, and it looks like it. It's just restored, so a much more pristine paint job. The inside is really sturdy and cozy looking. But if you know the movie, when you walk in, even though it's really nice, you know the layout of the house immediately. So there's like a staircase right when you walk in that's going upstairs. There's a big dining room to the right, and then another smaller room to the left, and then there's this little hallway in the back. Now in the movie, that's where Leatherface kind of lurks the whole time. It's his lair. It's like his butcher shop, his killing floor. And so I forget exactly what's back there in the restaurant, maybe the bathroom or something harmless and innocuous, but it's one of those things where I walked in and I'm like, I know this is a nice breakfast place. I know there's nothing dangerous here, but I know the layout of this place. I recognize it from this movie that scares the hell out of me. I don't want to go back there. And you can actually go upstairs in the second story. They've kind of decked out with a lot of Texas Chainsaw memorabilia. It's pretty cool. And if you go right into the dining room, that is the scene in the movie where the character of Pam goes and finds all these bones and feathers and animal carcasses and collapses for being so grossed out. So it's kind of funny that you get to eat delicious blueberry pancakes in the room where one of the most disgusting scenes happens. But yeah, it's definitely worth the visit. I'm blanking on the name. I should maybe do a little bit more research before I do these episodes. I have my computer right here, but I don't want to mess too much with the sound and everything. But yeah, you should totally go eat at this place. It was packed when we went there. I don't know if it was filled with people who were making a pilgrimage like I was to see the Texas Chainsaw House, or if they were just, locals who were enjoying some breakfast tacos and pancakes or whatever. But as you can tell on this channel, I talk a lot about going to see these kind of horror movie landmarks. It's definitely a thing I like to do. I don't think I'm the most obsessive fanboy. I'm not, dressed as Leatherface when I go and do this stuff. It's more of a thing where, like, if I'm in a place and I discover that there's some kind of scary movie landmark nearby, it just feels like a cool thing to go. I love thinking that I'm in close proximity to this piece of art that I really love. When I came to Austin, Texas Chainsaw wasn't really on my mind until Tobe passed away. And it feels kind of cool to then look up how close you are to this stuff, and you're like, oh, I'm like literally a 20-minute drive from here. I'm gonna hop in and go. I just like that feeling of me being in my house and knowing that a piece of film history is not that far away. It's just a good, comforting kind of feeling, and I always have good experiences going to those places. So that's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. I'm actually a big fan of at least the next sequel and the remake. I know a lot of people hate that remake, but to me it's one of those quintessential, like, early 2000s horror movies. I saw it in undergrad, and I'll always have a soft spot for it. So maybe we'll get to that eventually. Maybe we'll do the sequel at some point, and the remake with Jessica Biel, and there were some of the other people in it. Arlie Ermey, rest in peace. So yeah, but hey, the good news is there are a lot of horror movies out there. I happen to love a lot of them, and I've seen a lot of them, so I don't think we'll be running out of films to cover anytime soon. Thank you again for watching. Once again, I hope you're either asleep or you found this interesting, or maybe a combination of both. Also, spread the word if you know folks who are into ASMR, and I know not everyone is into ASMR, but if you know some people who are and they want something a little bit different, or you think this would be their bag, please do refer them to the channel. If you like what you see, give me a like and a subscribe. And also, I said this last week, I've got some time on my hands. I love interacting with people online, so if you comment or want to shoot me a message, I guarantee you I will respond probably pretty quickly. I've got my eyes on the socials kind of all day. Yeah, so don't be shy about reaching out. Let me know if there's a movie you want me to cover, or if you just want to offer thoughts, or if I got something wrong, or if there's a piece of Texas Chainsaw trivia that I didn't include that you're like, Dan, what's wrong with you? You had to talk about that. That's all stuff I'm interested in. So yeah, thank you again for tuning in. I will see you next week. I hope you're safe. I hope you're healthy. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.